I thought I was done with surprises, until the boy next door came home a man, and looked at me like I was more than just a memory from his childhood. I wasn't expecting anything unusual that morning. The air was mild, the garden quiet, and the tulips, once brilliant, had already begun to surrender their petals. Spring had reached the soft edge of summer, and in that lull between seasons, time felt like it was pausing with me. I was kneeling in the front flower bed, the wide brim of my straw hat casting shadows across my face, when I heard the familiar crunch of tires on gravel. Slow, hesitant, like someone returning to a place that no longer fully belonged to them. I stood up, brushing soil from my palms, and looked toward the sound. A silver Honda, faded but unmistakable, rolled into the driveway next door. The same car I'd watched pull away 2 summers ago. The license plate had changed, and so had the person behind the wheel. He stepped out with the kind of quiet confidence that doesn't announce itself. It simply arrives. Taller now, broader in the shoulders. Still young, but with the posture of someone who'd begun to carry his own stories. "Hey, Mrs. Parker," he called out with a smile that stretched across the space between us. I blinked into the sun. "Danny." My voice caught between surprise and familiarity. "It's me," he said, closing the trunk with a soft thud. "Just got back from Chapel Hill." I hadn't seen him since the summer before college, before he packed his things and drove off with more dreams than direction. Back then, he was all limbs and shy glances, hovering near the fence when I baked lemon bars. He always waited until I offered a plate, never once asking. That boy wasn't here anymore. In his place stood someone steadier, sharper around the edges. A young man who had begun to understand that the world wasn't as large as it once seemed, but that some things, like kindness and memory, stay rooted. "Welcome home," I said, setting my gloves on the porch rail, trying to still the flicker in my chest. His eyes scanned the house, then drifted back to me. "Thanks. Mom's already got a list of things for me to fix." We both laughed. Felt natural, like slipping into an old rhythm, only slower now. Wiser, but beneath the ease, something unfamiliar moved. Maybe it was how his gaze lingered for a breath longer than it should have. Or maybe it was just me, reading too much into something simple. Still, when he asked, "Mind if I stop by later? I've been meaning to catch up," I found myself nodding before thinking. "Of course," I said. "I'll make some iced tea." He smiled again, gentle, genuine, then disappeared inside his house, leaving the quiet to settle around me once more. And yet, nothing felt quiet anymore. I stood there for a long time, fingertips still dusted with dirt, the sun warming the top of my shoulders. Something had shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to be noticed. It had been a long time since someone had looked at me and truly seen me, and even longer since I had let them. He came back just after 7. The sky was painted in muted pastels, lavender clouds against a soft amber hue. That quiet hour when day and night hold hands for a moment before letting go. I was on the back deck, a glass of iced tea in hand, listening to the cicadas hum like old radios warming up. The gate creaked. I turned, expecting a breeze. But it was Danny. He stepped onto the deck like it was something he'd done hundreds of times. And maybe he had, once years ago, when he was still just a boy visiting his mother's kitchen after mowing lawns on summer afternoons. But this time, he didn't carry that same unsure energy. He had changed into a navy t-shirt and worn jeans. His hair was damp, probably from a quick shower. There was a freshness to him, a quiet self-assurance, like someone who'd begun to settle into their own skin. "Hey again," he said casually, with a smile that didn't try too hard.
¿Y setea?
I offered, already pouring before he answered. "Sweet?" he asked. "The only kind worth making." He took a sip and let out a soft sigh. "Still the best in the neighborhood." We settled into a quiet rhythm, the kind that doesn't need prompting. He told me stories from his first year at Chapel Hill. Roommates who never did their dishes, professors who taught more about life than textbooks, late-night walks across campus when he couldn't sleep. I listened, not out of politeness but curiosity. He spoke with more depth than I remembered, more honesty. He wasn't trying to impress me. He was simply sharing, and that, in itself, was disarming. We laughed, a lot more than I expected. There was a lightness to the moment, but beneath it, something quieter rested. A thread of awareness that neither of us pulled on, but both of us felt. Then, somewhere between fireflies blinking to life and the sun slipping below the horizon, he said, "You haven't changed much, you know." I turned to look at him. "Haven't I?" "You still have that calm," he said, his tone softer now. "Back in high school, I'd come home all twisted up inside, and just talking to you, over the fence or sitting here, it helped. You probably never knew that." I didn't know what to say at first. Compliments from young men weren't something I had much practice with anymore. But it didn't feel like flattery. Felt like memory. "I always thought you were easy to talk to too," I said quietly. "A good kid." "You saw more than that," he replied. "You listened. You made me feel like I mattered, even when I didn't know who I was yet." And in that moment, the space between us changed shape. Not dramatically, just enough for me to notice the shift. This wasn't just a neighborly visit. It wasn't flirtation either. It was something quieter, something real. "You've grown up?" I murmured, unsure if I meant it as a compliment or a confession. "I have," he nodded. "And I've realized some things don't make sense until you leave and come back." I wanted to say more. I wanted to ask what he meant, but my throat caught on the weight of the moment. Instead, I whispered, "Maybe we both have some things to figure out." His gaze held mine, steady, unhurried. "Maybe we do." We sat there for a while longer in a silence that felt complete. The kind of silence that doesn't ache to be filled. When he stood, brushing his hands on his jeans, he asked, "Mind if I come by tomorrow?" "No," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "I'd like that." And as he walked back into the night, fireflies dancing in his wake like tiny echoes of light, I felt something shift again, something small, something quiet, but unmistakably alive. The next day moved slowly, like time had softened its edges. I busied myself with chores, laundry, dusting, organizing drawers that didn't need organizing. Anything to quiet the restless energy that hummed beneath my skin. By noon, I'd changed my blouse 3 times. I finally settled on a soft blue one, nothing fancy. Comfortable.
Presentable.
Appropriate, I told myself. This was just a visit. Just iced tea and conversation. Still, when the knock came, my breath caught before I could answer the door. Danny stood there holding a small paper bag, his smile boyish and familiar. "Hope I'm not too early," he said. "Not at all," I replied, stepping aside. "Come in." He walked to the kitchen and set the bag gently on the counter. "I brought muffins, cranberry, from the bakery on 5th. Thought you might like them. I blinked. That's thoughtful. Thank you. He grinned. You're the one who always baked for me. Figured it was time I returned the favor. There was something about the way he said it, unassuming, simple, that made my chest ache in a way I didn't fully understand. We sat at the table by the window, sunlight filtering through sheer curtains and landing in warm strips across the floor. I poured the tea. He unwrapped the muffins. We talked, but underneath the casual conversation, something else was present. Not tension exactly, more like awareness, as if both of us knew there was a line, and neither of us had crossed it, but we were getting close enough to see what lay on the other side. So, I said, breaking a piece of muffin, what's your plan for the summer? He leaned back, resting his arm on the chair. Helping Mom around the house. Maybe find a part-time job. Nothing too exciting. You thinking of staying here after college? Maybe, he said, then paused. His gaze drifted back to me. Depends. On what? He tilted his head slightly. On whether unfinished things still matter. I hesitated. Unfinished. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. Conversations I never had. Feelings I didn't understand until I left. There was no pretense in his voice. No performance. Just truth offered, not pushed. I met his gaze, and for the first time, I wasn't thinking about how many years lay between us. I wasn't thinking about what the neighbors might say. I was just there, with him, present. You were young, I said quietly. I still am, he replied, just as softly. But I'm not a kid anymore. I know that now. He reached out then, slowly, his fingers brushing against mine where they rested on the table. The touch was feather-light. He could have pulled away. I could have, but neither of us did. Instead, I turned my hand slightly, letting our fingertips rest together for just a moment longer. He didn't look at me with expectation. He wasn't asking. Felt more like permission, a gentle question. I don't know what this is, I whispered. Me neither, he said. But it feels real, and it did. It wasn't about fantasy. It wasn't about filling a void. It was presence, quiet, unexpected, and somehow more honest than anything I'd felt in a long time. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the world remained unchanged. Lawns trimmed, sparrows hopping from branch to branch, children's bikes abandoned on driveways. But inside me, something had shifted. Danny came up behind me, but not too close. I could feel his presence without seeing him. I thought about you more than I probably should have, he said quietly. And not just recently, even before I left. I didn't know what to do with it. I turned to him, heart thudding. I'm older than your mother, I said, not as a joke, but as something I needed to name. He nodded, unwavering. I know. But age doesn't change what's real. We stood in that pause between memory and possibility, between the life I thought I'd settled into and whatever this was beginning to become. Then gently, he reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. I'm not asking for anything, he said. Just a chance to know you. Not as a neighbor, just as you. And for the first time in years, I felt seen. Not as someone safe, not as someone familiar, but as someone worth seeing. The next morning began like any other. Sunlight slipped through the blinds in pale gold slats, and the hum of lawnmowers stirred somewhere down the street. I sat at the kitchen table, a half-finished cup of coffee cooling in my hands. My breakfast had long since gone cold, but I wasn't thinking about eggs or toast. I was thinking about him, about how he looked at me, not with reverence or longing, but with recognition, as if he saw someone I'd almost forgotten I was. I tried to push the thoughts aside. I folded laundry. I rearranged a spice drawer. I vacuumed the hallway twice. But the anticipation hummed beneath everything. Not nervousness exactly, something quieter, like expectancy dressed in denial. By noon, I changed again. Not for him, I told myself, just something comfortable, something light and soft and unremarkable. The knock came just after 1. I opened the door with a practiced smile. "Hey," I said too brightly. He lifted a small paper bag and gave me a crooked grin. "Hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all. Come in." He stepped inside like he'd been here before, which of course he had, but not like this. Not as a man. Not as someone who made the air feel different when he entered. "I brought something," he said, placing the bag on the counter. "Cranberry muffins. The ones from the bakery you used to recommend." "You remembered that?" He shrugged, almost sheepishly. "You always baked for me." I figured. Maybe it was time I returned the favor. The gesture was simple, sweet, and somehow it disarmed me more than flowers or grand words ever could. I poured fresh tea. He unwrapped the muffins. We sat at the small table beneath the kitchen window, where light streamed in and caught on the rim of his glass. For a moment, it felt like nothing had changed. Just a boy I used to know. Just tea and muffins. Just a summer afternoon. But the current beneath it all had shifted. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. "So," I said, more to fill the air than anything else, "what's your plan now that you're back?" He leaned back slightly, fingers brushing the glass of tea. "Mostly helping my mom. Might pick up some work. But honestly, I'm just figuring things out." I nodded, pretending to understand. But when he looked at me again, really looked, I knew that wasn't the full answer. "You thinking of staying here long term?" I asked. "Maybe," he said, holding my gaze. "There are things here that feel unfinished." I didn't speak right away. The space between us grew still again, comfortable but charged. "Like what?" I asked softly. He didn't rush his answer. "Like conversations I never had. Questions I never asked. Feelings I didn't understand. Until I left." And there it was, that quiet truth, laid gently between us like an unopened letter. No pressure. No demands. Just honesty. I looked at him then, and for the first time I stopped comparing the now to the before. He wasn't the teenager I used to hand cookies over the fence to. He wasn't just the boy next door. He was someone standing in front of me, offering his presence, his time, his awareness, and I had no idea what to do with that. "You're still young," I said quietly. "I know," he replied, "but I'm not confused. And I'm not here because I'm bored." His words were steady, not rehearsed or romantic, just real. And real is what unraveled me. He reached out again, just as he had the night before, fingers brushing mine where they rested near the glass. I didn't move away, not this time. I didn't hold on either. I simply let it happen. Let that brief, honest contact rest for a moment longer than it needed to. Not a promise, not a beginning, just a pause, an acknowledgement. Whatever this was, we hadn't named it. We hadn't defined it. But we were both standing at the edge of something unspoken, and neither of us was ready to step back. The sky hung low that afternoon, brushed with the promise of rain. I had meant to go through old books in the attic, a chore I'd postponed for months. but something about the silence in the house made it feel like the right day to go searching through forgotten things. I lifted the lid on an old box labeled in my late husband's handwriting, "Spring Keepsakes," and sat down on the wooden floor, dust blooming softly in the light. Inside, faded photographs, pressed flowers between journal pages, a letter I hadn't seen in years. I unfolded it with careful hands. It wasn't anything remarkable, just a note scribbled during the early years of our marriage, back when we still surprised each other with small things, back when silence wasn't yet something to be feared. I held it longer than I meant to. It wasn't sorrow exactly. It was the ache of realizing how much tenderness can vanish without either person meaning it to. So when Danny knocked that evening, a worn paperback tucked beneath his arm and that same gentle smile, I almost told him I wasn't up for company, but I didn't. I opened the door, and he stepped inside like he belonged there. We sat in the living room. The soft patter of rain played on the windows like background music. He handed me the book. Something he said had made him think of me, and we slipped into conversation without needing to try. After a while, he tilted his head and looked at me thoughtfully. "You seem quiet tonight." "I was in the attic," I said. "Found some things I'd forgotten I still had." He didn't pry. He just waited. "It's strange," I went on, my voice barely above a whisper, "how someone can be part of your everyday life for years, and then one day, they're not. And the things they leave behind, letters, dishes, pieces of themselves, suddenly feel like too much. And not enough." His gaze stayed steady, warm. "I think about that too," he said, "about how people leave, physically, emotionally, and how we're supposed to keep moving like nothing happened." I looked down at my hands. How many times had I gone through the motions? How long had I been doing it without even realizing? "I don't want to make this complicated," I said quietly. "You're so young, Danny. You have your whole life ahead of you." He didn't flinch, didn't retreat. "I'm not looking for a distraction," he said. "I'm not here because I'm restless or curious or trying to escape anything." He leaned forward slightly, not to invade my space, but to be closer to the truth between us. "I'm here because when I'm with you, I feel more like myself than I do anywhere else." His words were simple, honest, and they pressed into something I'd kept sealed for years. I turned to him slowly. For once, I let myself see what had been growing in the space between us. Not as something forbidden, not as something reckless, but as a quiet, careful unfolding. "I'm scared," I admitted. "Not of you, of what this might mean, of what it might ask me to feel again." "I know," he said. "Me too." He reached out, this time slower, gentler, and took my hand. I let him. The contact was warm, grounding, not urgent, not claiming, just there. "I'm not trying to rewrite your life," he said. "I just want to be in it, however you'll let me." I closed my eyes, not to escape, but to hold the feeling fully. It didn't feel like falling, felt like arriving, safe, unexpected, whole. That night, after he left, the house felt heavier, not in a sorrowful way, just full, with all the words we hadn't said, and the ones we had, still lingering in the corners like the scent of rain on old wood. I didn't sleep much. My thoughts drifted in and out like waves, never crashing, just moving. His voice, the way he said my name, the steadiness in his eyes when he told me he wasn't trying to rewrite anything, that he just wanted to be part of whatever still remained. The next morning arrived wrapped in sunlight and the soft scent of lilacs. It filtered in through the open window, brushing gently across my face like a reminder that even quiet beginnings can feel like awakenings. I moved slowly, carefully.
There.
Toast. A few pages of a book I couldn't seem to follow. But everything, every motion, felt different. Like the air itself had memory now. Just before noon, Danny arrived again. No call, no warning, just presence. He held a brown paper sack, wore a quiet smile, and said, "Lunch. Chicken salad and peach tea. Hope I guessed right." I let out a soft laugh. "You're spoiling me." "Good," he replied, stepping inside. "You deserve it." We ate at the same small table by the window, sunlight dappling the floor beneath us. The conversation meandered through small things. His mom rearranging the living room, a class he wanted to take just because he liked how the professor spoke. We didn't talk about the night before. We didn't need to. It was still there between us, anchored, not avoided. A thread held gently at both ends. After lunch, we carried our tea to the back deck. The cicadas hadn't started yet. The trees barely moved. It was one of those summer afternoons where even time seems to nap. We sat side by side, the porch swing creaking quietly beneath us. "I used to think love had an expiration date," I said, my voice almost lost to the warm breeze. "That it was only meant for the young." Danny didn't respond right away. He looked at me, really looked, and then he reached out, fingers brushing mine. Not like the first time when it felt like a question. This time it was an answer. Our hands met, held, no tension, no doubt, just quiet recognition. "Do you remember the first time I came to your porch?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "You were 15, maybe younger. You stood there awkwardly, pretending not to stare at the lemon bars." He chuckled. "I was more interested in you than the lemon bars. I just didn't know how to say it." I turned toward him slowly, and for the first time I let myself see him, not through the lens of age or history or the fear of how it would look from the outside, but as he was now. Not the boy who once hovered at the edge of my garden, but the man who had quietly found a place in my life again. "I've been alone a long time," I said, "and I got used to it. But now you've stirred something I thought had gone still." He took my other hand gently. "Then let's not rush it," he said. "Let it grow the way it's meant to." A breeze passed between us, lifting the leaves in the trees like a sigh. Somewhere down the street, wind chimes stirred in the distance. Felt like a blessing, a quiet one meant only for us. Not because we ran out of words, but because silence had become something safe, something shared. I sat back, still holding his hand. His thumb traced slow circles over mine, thoughtlessly, like a rhythm he didn't know he was keeping. But I felt it, felt everything, and it terrified me. "I worry," I said quietly, not looking at him. He didn't interrupt. "I worry about what people might say. About your mother, the neighbors, the way people carry stories they don't understand like sharp stones in their mouths." Still, he didn't speak. He waited. I turned slightly toward him. "I've built a life that's small and quiet. And now, this feels like stepping into the light without knowing who's watching." He nodded slowly. "I thought about that too," he said. "But I'm not ashamed of how I feel. And I don't need anyone else to understand it. Just you." His voice didn't waver. There was no defiance in it, only clarity. He wasn't here for approval. He was here for me, and that somehow was more terrifying than judgment, because it meant I had to decide whether I believed I was worth being chosen. I looked down at our joined hands. "When I was your age," I said softly. I thought I knew everything. He smiled gently. You probably knew more than most. I didn't, I said, shaking my head. I made choices that cost me years. Years I spent learning the value of quiet, of kindness, of truth that doesn't need to shout. His fingers tightened around mine, just slightly. I'm glad I met you now, he said. And not before. I looked up, startled. If I had met you when I was younger, I would have tried to turn this into something loud, something dramatic, something to prove something. He paused. But now, I just want to be here, to know you, to be known. We sat in the warm hush of the afternoon. Nothing between us but a low breeze and the sound of wind chimes from a few houses away. I let my shoulders drop, let the fear sit beside me, not in me. And in that moment, I realized I didn't have to justify anything, not to anyone, not even to myself, because maybe what we were building didn't need defending. Maybe it just needed protecting. He started coming by more often after that, sometimes with a book tucked under his arm, sometimes with something his mother had baked that he said he didn't want to eat alone, sometimes with no reason at all. It wasn't about what he brought. It was about how long he stayed. We didn't always talk. Often we didn't need to. We'd sit on the porch swing in the late afternoons, sharing the kind of silence that didn't ask to be filled. It wasn't awkward. It was gentle, a quiet kind of nearness that felt more like company than attention. One evening, as the sun slipped below the line of rooftops, he told me about his father. He left when I was 11, Danny said, his voice steady but quiet. Just gone. One day there, the next not. I didn't even know what abandonment was until I saw the way it lingered in my mother. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. And for the longest time, I thought maybe it was something in me. Something unlovable. I turned toward him slowly, watching his hands fidget in his lap, an old reflex he hadn't quite outgrown. But being around you, he continued, feels different. Like I don't have to do anything to be worth something. That stayed with me long after he left that night, after the porch light flickered on, after the silence returned, because what he said wasn't just about his past. It was about how he saw me and how I had started to see myself. The next day, I found myself in the attic again. I hadn't planned to go there, but some places call to you when you're already on the edge of remembering. I opened an old tin box of letters. One was from a time when my husband and I were still learning each other's language. The way we used to say, "I'm sorry," without saying it. The way we used to love quietly, before quiet became the only thing between us. Grief is strange. It doesn't always arrive in tears. Sometimes, it just lingers in the air, waiting for a moment to make itself known. When Danny knocked that afternoon, I almost didn't answer, but I did. And when I opened the door, his eyes met mine, and he didn't ask if I was okay. He just stepped in like someone who had already decided to stay. We sat in the living room.
No tea. No muffins.
No performance, just presence. And after a while, I said softly, I think I forgot how to let someone sit with me like this. You don't have to try, he replied. That's kind of the point. And maybe it was. Maybe love wasn't about starting over. Maybe it was about letting someone stand beside you exactly where you are and staying anyway. The morning after he told me about his father, I woke with a strange stillness in my chest. Not emptiness, just quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like something is rearranging itself inside you. Outside, the scent of lilacs drifted through the open window, and sunlight warmed the wood floors like a slow exhale. I moved through my morning routine as if my body remembered what to do, even as my thoughts wandered elsewhere. To him, to the way he sat on my porch like he'd always belonged there, to the way he listened not to respond but to understand. I found myself in the garden again, pruning roses. My hands moved out of habit, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. On the porch swing, on his voice, on the pause that now lived between his words when he looked at me. When Danny arrived just before noon, he brought a paper sack and a boyish smile. "Lunch," he announced. "Chicken salad. And peach tea, of course." "You're starting to spoil me," I said, already stepping aside to let him in. "Good," he replied, setting the food on the counter. "You deserve it." We sat in the same spot by the window, where light filtered through the curtains in soft waves, dappling the table and catching on the rim of his glass. He told me about his mother's habit of rearranging the living room when she was anxious, about how he'd signed up for a literature class just because he liked the professor's voice. Small things, everyday things. But with him, even those stories felt anchored in something real. We didn't mention what had passed between us. We didn't need to. It lingered, like the scent of lemon balm in the back garden. Subtle, but impossible to ignore. After lunch, we moved out to the deck. The air was warm, the breeze gentle. We sat with iced tea in hand, the porch swing rocking in slow rhythm. I watched the way the light fell across his forearm, the quiet certainty in the way he existed beside me. "I used to believe love had a window," I said after a while. "A season. Like if you missed it, that was it. The chance passed. And now," I glanced down at my hands, lined, capable, steady. "Now I think maybe it just changes shape." He reached out then, his hand finding mine without hesitation. This time I didn't flinch. I didn't overthink it. I just let our hands rest together, quietly laced. "Do you remember the first time I came to your porch?" he asked. "I do," I said, smiling faintly. "You looked so nervous. You kept glancing at the lemon bars like they might disappear." "I was more interested in you than the lemon bars," he said softly. "I just didn't have the language for it yet." I turned to him fully, and in that moment I saw it clearly. This wasn't nostalgia. It wasn't fantasy. It wasn't about filling a gap in time. It was connection, quiet, unrushed, and rooted in something real. "I've been alone a long time," I said, "and I got used to it. But now you've stirred something I thought had gone quiet forever." He held my other hand then, both of his hands around mine, gentle, present. "Then let's take our time," he said. "Let it grow the way it's meant to." And I believed him, not because he promised anything, but because he didn't have to. The next morning, the world looked exactly the same. Porches swept clean, flags fluttering in front yards, lawnmowers rumbling in the distance like the hum of an old song. But I wasn't the same. Something inside me had tilted. Not dramatically, not all at once, just enough to change how the light hit the corners of my life. I spent the early hours in the garden, brushing dew from rose petals, pruning stems I'd left too long. My hands moved with intention, but my mind was elsewhere. On the way his voice softened when he said my name, the way he didn't flinch at silence, the way he looked at me like I was still someone unfolding. Just before noon, he arrived again. This time, no bag, no excuse, just him. He stepped through the back gate and onto the deck as if he'd always belonged there, and maybe he did. We sat without fanfare, no words needed right away. After a while, I said, I've been thinking. He looked over at me. Calm. Steady. I worry what people might assume, I admitted. What your mother would say. What neighbors might whisper. I've thought about that too, he said. But I'm not doing this for them. I'm here because it's you. He didn't say it like a vow. He said it like a truth, and I didn't doubt it. I leaned back in my chair and looked at him. Not as someone forbidden, not as someone too young, not as a reflection of my past, but as a person who had seen me and stayed. When I was your age, I rushed everything, I said. I mistook noise for meaning. I thought love had to be dramatic to be real. And now, he asked, now I know the quiet things are the ones that last. He reached over, took my hand, not to make a statement, but to stay connected. No tension, no grasping, just presence. I'm not in a hurry, he said. Not with this, not with you. And I believed him, because in all the days he had come, he had never asked me to be anything but who I already was. As the afternoon deepened and the wind stirred the leaves above us, we sat in silence, not avoiding, not performing, just being. Later, when he left, I stood at the window and watched the sky darken. I thought of all the years I had spent folding myself smaller, mistaking stillness for safety. But something had changed, not loudly, not all at once, just enough to breathe again. Love, I realized, doesn't always come like thunder or lightning. Sometimes, it's the quiet shift of roots beneath your feet. Sometimes, it's someone sitting beside you, day after day, saying nothing but staying. And sometimes, that's all it takes for something to grow. If this story stirred something in you, something quiet, something familiar, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to feel seen. Because sometimes, the smallest moments leave the deepest roots.